Hello, and welcome to Freedom Keepers Senior Edition. This is the podcast where we reach out to all our seniors to stand up for liberty, love of country, faith, and family. So thank you for joining me, Irene, and my co-host, Beverly. This is our fifth episode entitled A New Form of Government, Really? And I'll tell you why we're calling that in a minute. So our country is a constitutional federal republic and a representative democracy. Where citizens elect officials to make laws, power is divided between federal and state governments, and the Constitution serves as the supreme law, giving us three separate branches, which I'm sure you all know: executive, legislative, and judicial, with checks and balances for each. It's a system where the people hold ultimate power and exercise it through elected representatives, not direct rule. So this is really important. The people hold the power, folks. The people, we hold the power. In this episode, we're going to discuss socialism, communism, and ultimately tyranny. Not everyone is exactly clear on what these forms of government are. And because of these movements, which are raising their ugly heads throughout our country now, we thought it vital that you should know exactly what they entail. And more important, why it's so important we never go there. Seniors, your children, your grandchildren, and great grandchildren depend on this. So, Beverly, can you start us off, please, with a brief overview of socialism and perhaps the core principles?
Well, thank you very much, Irene, and thank you very much for joining us, everyone. I'll give you the dictionary explanation for socialism. Socialism is an economic and political system and based on public or collective ownership of the means of production, aiming for a more equal distribution of wealth and resources. It emphasizes cooperation over competition, often involving government management of key industries to meet social needs, contrasting with private ownership and profit driven motives found in capitalism. And over the past 100 years or so, socialist experiments around the world unleashed a vast tide of tyranny, starvation, and mass murder on a scale never seen before in human history.
So, as I understand it, the government acts as the central authority and determines distribution. Ultimately, these systems fail because they suppress everything that God has given us. The government gains everything. The government holds the power. Again, not the people. People do not hold the power. So consider this: there's no competition in a socialist system. You don't have to have any ambition, nor do you have to excel or use your brain to its greatest potential. Everyone gets the same in theory, except for the government, who's usually in charge of all the banking, production, resources, and economic planning. They are the elite class. They're the ones that hold the power. So, Beverly, why don't you give us some real life examples of where socialism has been promoted?
Well, all we have to think about, Irene, is about what's going on in North Korea right now. The supreme leader is Kim Jong un. He's got absolute power through his leadership of the Workers' Party of Korea. People live under a totalitarian system that maintains total control through fear, surveillance, and brutality. And this started out as a socialist system where everyone would be equal and prosper. That was the scheme that they came up with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as of early 2026, the United Nations reported that this cruelty has gotten worse over the last decade. The mass starvation, which continues to this day, and the statistics on it are horrific. Many former citizens of North Korea who have escaped tell us about the poor living conditions that prevail. North Korea identifies as a socialist state, but it's clearly a communist state or totalitarian dictatorship where only Kim Jong un and his colleagues thrive in a communist environment. It's now considered one of the 5 communist countries in the world.
So, where else in the world has socialism been tried and has been, for the most part, unsuccessful?
Well, socialism was implemented in China, Cuba, Maduro's Venezuela, and as I have stated before, North Korea, Vietnam, Cambodia, Ethiopia, Somalia, and other countries. In every one of those places, Irene, it has failed. More recently, Maduro's socialist regimes turned Venezuela, once the wealthiest nation in South America, into utter ruin. Its economy is marked by hyperinflation, oppression, and starvation. And did you know that approximately a fifth of the population fled the country
Huh.
since 2014? And Cuba is another socialist state run by the Communist Party of Cuba. It all started with Fidel when he overtook what he thought was a, super inflated economy. It's to this day a one party republic where they maintain absolute control over the government, media, and security. The state controls healthcare, education, sugar, and tobacco. And get this, everything. They control everything. At present, they are experiencing a severe oil and energy crisis, which was the result of Maduro's capture. And because they supplied all the subsidized oil, the people suffer under a system that promised them that everything would be given to them, guess what, for free. The people of Cuba have struggled to survive for at least the last 67 years since Fidel took over. At present, it's even harder as Cuba faces its worst economic crisis since the collapse of the Soviet Union. There is massive inflation and a migration crisis. Well, that is for those who try to exit, if exit permits can be obtained, which is very, very difficult.
Wow. And that's Fidel Castro, as
Yeah.
everybody knows. Beverly, let's talk a little bit about one of the largest countries in the world who has used socialism as a foundation for communism for many, many years, China.
Well, Mao's Soviet style socialism plunged China into two of its most catastrophic historical periods ever: the Great Leap Forward in 1958 and the Cultural Revolution in 1966. The former was a bold, comprehensive campaign to industrialize China's agricultural economy. And that went terribly wrong and resulted in 30 million Chinese starving to death. The latter was Mao's attempt to purge political opposition and reassert his authority after the failure of the Great Leap Forward. The Cultural Revolution was notoriously vicious. It lasted 10 years, Irene, and crippled the Chinese economy, obliterated much of China's society, and caused yet another 2 million deaths. Socialism doesn't seem like a very desirable form of government, does it?
Certainly does, and especially if you
Uh-huh.
have 32 million deaths.
That's right.
That's really, really a horrible thing.
Uh,
So then after that, you have communism. As seniors, most of us remember the Red Scare growing up. Some of us remember the McCarthy era, etc. Communism was a bad word. And guess what? It still is. Karl Marx was known as the father of communism from 1848 when he wrote the Communist Manifesto. Then, along with Friedrich Engels, who wrote Das Kapital, outlining his ideology, which aimed for a classless, stateless society based on common ownership of production, eliminating private property, and profit driven markets. It seeks to replace capitalism and distribute goods from each according to their ability and to each according to their needs. And it requires a violent revolution to overthrow existing capitalist systems. So, in theory, communism is a good idea. It works. But in reality, it really doesn't. And many of Marx's predictions were wrong. Also, if people tell you that they are a Marxist, they're really a communist because that was Karl Marx. Communist societies have no freedom of speech, and overall, there is a severe repression of individual freedoms. There's also a lack of economic incentives, economic inefficiencies, many, forced labor, banning of all religion, and human rights abuses. It does not make for a content or satisfied population.
I read that Marx addressed socialism as a beginning path for a final solution of communism, which is ultimately where leaders want to go. He called it a stepping stone to communism. That's why we need to be very careful, ladies and gentlemen, with our Democratic Socialist Party of America today.
Which seems to be growing as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
So currently in 2026, there are 5 self-declared communist nations: China, North Korea, Cuba, Laos, and Vietnam. All are a one-party system and heavily controlled market economy. Russia was a communist country for 75 years, from 1917, when from their revolution, led by the Bolsheviks and Lenin, they killed their czar, his wife, and 5 children, and threw all their bodies into abandoned wells. It officially ended in 1991 when the then USSR was officially dissolved. It became 15 separate countries, and Russia is one of them. And although Russia has a communist party, which is really only the second largest party in Russia, they call themselves officially a democratic republic. And while it does have a multi party system now, in practice, it functions as an authoritarian state dominated by Putin, and it blends democratic structures like freedom of religion and capitalist markets, while at the same time limiting real political choice and freedoms of speech and the press. I lived in the communist USSR for almost 3 years around 1980, way back when, working for a trading company. You will recall I mentioned that I was a Russian literature major, and that's how I got there. I was able to experience firsthand what living under communism was. And I can say it's not something most Americans would subscribe to. Although, as a foreigner officially working there, I was very privileged as well as segregated from the regular population. We lived in an apartment building which was only for foreigners, and we had a guard post outside to make sure regular Russians could not enter. We had access to special stores for food and goods called beryozkas, where regular Russians were not allowed. We also had a different color license plate on our cars so that we could be spotted quickly. And I worked in an office where there were 5 Americans and 20 Soviet citizens. So while everyone was very cordial, very nice, easy to work with, there was definite atmosphere of restraint. We Americans really had to watch what we said all the time. I got a much closer look into the culture after I met my husband, who was Russian, a photographer. I was able to meet many regular Russians through him and his friends and colleagues. By regular, I mean not really party members. And of course, I had to do it carefully, as all of us Americans knew we were being watched all the time. We had to abide by the rules of their country, which were not the same as ours. And certain things were a given. For example, if you ever wanted to have a serious conversation or discussion, especially about something of a political nature, you went for a walk outside. You never discussed it in your apartment or even in your car. You could not entertain Russian friends in your apartment, the ones we lived in for foreigners, as they would be processed coming in, and most were reluctant to do that. And you didn't really talk about your activities or Russian friends at the office. At one point, my husband was called into the KGB, and they grilled him about me at length and kept asking, were my views progressive? It was really a hairy experience for him. Basic food items in stores were often non existent, and lines formed immediately if something was offered. It was a challenge to put decent food on the table for your family. It really was. Also, if you wanted to move, change your apartment, or even leave the country, forget about it. It took my husband almost 1 year to obtain a visa to leave the USSR after we had been officially married. We had to jump through quite a few hoops to get that far. Nothing was easy.
Well, Irene, one key factor with both communism and socialism, I might add, is that they always have an elite class. That is another given, although they profess to be a classless society.
And that's a lot of BS, I can tell you firsthand. The Soviets I worked with were part of that elite class, meaning good Communist Party members. They had advantages that regular Russians did not, such as better apartments, the ability to purchase a car, food items, a refrigerator, and clothing, a decent pair of shoes. Again,
Wow.
in a communist country, the party is everything, comes way before country or the individual. And that is true today in those countries who are communist, such as China, North Korea, and Cuba. The elite class prospers and continues to do so, while the regular people are just the worker bees. Russia today is different in some ways. They have better and more access to material goods, supermarkets almost like ours, and the ability to move around more freely. However, freedom of speech, while better, is still not as open as in our country. And you still have to watch yourself and not get on anyone's list of suspect characters. But Putin is still popular. And I believe, or it's my opinion, that that's based solely on the capitalist markets that are now allowed, meaning you can, open your own business, have your own business. But after having spent 75 years of almost nothing in the stores, very little food available, clothing not available, no decent pair of shoes. So most people can now more easily put food on the table. And that's a big thing, especially after going without for 75 years. So I can personally say that a communist system does not make for a happy individual. It represses you and ultimately kills your soul. We as Americans need to know and understand that. It's a form of tyranny that wears you down in all ways. Beverly, let's discuss socialism and communism currently in the United States, which our audience really needs to be aware of.
Well, I really think you have to look at the newly elected mayor in New York City, Zohran Mamdani, who considers himself a democratic socialist, as does AOC. And they're both determined to implement a progressive agenda focused on affordability and public services, including free bus service, free childcare, rent freezes, and affordable housing by imposing a 2% point increase on New York City residents earning more than $1 million annually. With that, along with a 7.25 to an 11.5 rate increase on corporations to fund his $122 billion budget expansion of public services. Now, if corporations move to other states, along with the millionaires and tax revenues fall short, then he's going to try to go for a property tax for all New Yorkers, if, of course, Kathy Hochul agrees. But I believe he is talking about a 9.5
Yes.
property increase just recently, wasn't he, Irene?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes, he was. And there's another lady by the name of Lilia Mahea. She's a former staffer of Bernie Sanders, and she recently won a special election for the Democratic primary in Wayne, New Jersey. She is a Democratic socialist. The rise of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party with AOC and Jasmine Crockett. Well, guess what? Jasmine Crockett's no longer with us. However, we have a rather radical person winning over her, whose name is Tallarico, who was so far left, the left isn't there anymore. And he's mobilizing young people ages 18 to 34, and they're the drivers of this change with some support among the older generation. Those are probably the ones from the Kane University, right? Irene,
Right,
you would
right,
you would know about that, right?
right.
Well, they're making headway with their strategies on advocating equal income inequality, climate change, and healthcare. We all need to be aware and watch them closely. Generation Z is especially influenced by them because of their politics of affordability in housing and healthcare, close to 40%, according to the polls. Seniors, we must talk to our children and our grandchildren and enlighten them.
That's a task that seniors really need to take up. So, who are the leaders of socialism in the United States? We have AOC, of course, Rashida Tlaib, Mamdani, Greg Kasar of Texas, and while not a Democrat Socialist Party of America member, Bernie Sanders, who continues to inspire the movement. By the way, he is also a professed communist and always has been.
Mhm.
When he was mayor of Burlington, Vermont from 1981 to 89, he flew the hammer and sickle flag outside his office. True story. Also, you have Senator Brisport of New York, Congresswoman Forrest of New York, and Council Member Caban of New York City, all Democrat socialists. The Democratic Socialist Party of America, while not a large group yet, acts more like an activist group within the Democrat Party. And I'm waiting for all those moderate Democrats to speak up, which, aside from Fetterman, I haven't seen or heard any.
That probably will never happen.
Yeah.
Let's think about who are the leaders of the Communist Party in the United States. You've got co-chairs that are who's Joe Sims and Rosanna Cabran, and that's from since 2019. And membership is 15,000 to 20,000. Although that may include subscriptions, not members. It's hard to really get a correct number. national headquarters in New York City on West 23rd Street. That's where their national headquarters is. They have clubs and districts throughout the United States. It's very hard to get a handle on them. Their slogan for democracy, for equality, and for socialism, for a sustainable future and a world that puts people before profits. Join the Communist Party, USA Today, with a weekly broadcast called Good Morning Revolution. That's disgusting. Up until 2000, they reported to the Soviet Union, but their membership dwindled as they lost the financial support when the USSR was dissolved in 1991. Thank God for that.
Yeah. Our Constitution highlights our inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, given to us by our Creator God, making all men equal. He gave us a brain to utilize to the best of our abilities. Some work harder than others, some succeed more than others. Competition is healthy. God wants us to use our brains, the great gift He has given to all of us, the ability to think new thoughts, create new ideas, and to be more effective and productive. Socialism and communism are forms of tyranny. They are contrary to our Constitution and to God and to our American values. They do not give power to the people, they take it away. They
That's
take
right.
away our power. So we, as seniors and all people, must oppose them with every fiber of our being. We will not have a new form of government, not on our senior watch. Please help us make this so.
Thank you, Irene. That was beautifully said. Thank you all for being with us today. You can help us by subscribing to our channel and sharing it with your friends and family. That will help us grow. You can view more episodes every other Sunday. Let us know what you as seniors would like to hear about and help keep our liberty first place. We want to thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Thank you and see you next time.